it's really a countdown situation. I'm a little bit like, yes, a little pressure. Yes, green light. Welcome everyone. Welcome Stavroula Golfomitsou and Sujeong Lee. Welcome everyone who is joining us online. I'm very pleased to introduce this conversation. I'll introduce you in a moment, but I want to use this opportunity to say thank you to Mudec for organizing this seminar on conservation practices and allow me the possibility and the chance to talk in front of this very interesting and caring colleagues. Thanks to MUST, who that is supporting me in this experience here at Mudec. Today, in this hour that we have, we'll talk about conservation and practices that are changing and affecting the way that we do our job in institutions and private practice. We'll talk about values and some of the values that nowadays are affecting not just our practices, but our lives truly, and centering the experience of, and we're talking about museums obviously and collections, but practices that are now shifting towards the experience of our visitors with the collections, with our relationships to the collections. And so we have today Stavroula Golfomitsou, the head of collections at the Getty Conservation Institute in Los Angeles. Thank you, Stavroula, for connecting and being with us today. We have Sujeong Lee. Sujeong is head of the Research and Development Office at the International Center for Interpretation and Presentation at World Heritage Sites, which is under the auspices of UNESCO, and she's located in Sujeong, South Korea. And thank you, Marina will be part of this conversation. Marina is director at Mudec, at the institution where we are talking from, speaking from, but we truly have everyone who participated in this seminar I won't have the time to introduce everyone. We had 5 minutes before this live streaming to introduce ourselves. So I hope that everyone will be participated in this dialogue, and please introduce yourself before sharing your thoughts. So I thought that I could start by sharing a little bit what we've done in the past, in these 2 days. We touched on the most current theories of conservation that are, as I said, setting with the focus of our presentations and our approaches to conservation and displaying these collections by centering the human experience. And so one of the things that has really affected me in the past few years as conservator, I'm a photography conservator, has been reflecting on what my recommendations sometimes do to the visitors. And not everyone may know that photography is very light sensitive, and so changing a little bit the approach and trying to be more thoughtful, more than I've been so far, in considering the different levels of perception, vision perception of our audiences, and trying to include this thought in my recommendations. And so I guess the question is truly for everyone here and for you too, is to perhaps share what in the past few years for you has been a new practice that included, or a new approach that you thought really has been meaningful to you, and one that you are particularly attached to. Thank you.
Roberta, it's better if you ask who you want to go first, but I wanted to also to say that your image is now blurred. It's not very clear.
The way that you see us?
Yes.
I'm here. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you, but I think Bola means that it becomes clearer now. To you, Bola, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry you cannot see us well.
Yeah, sometimes it becomes out of focus, so that's why I think Bola mentioned that it becomes a blur. But it is now okay.
But you can hear us well. Not really? You cannot hear us well?
I can hear you. I can. Can
you, Stavroula, hear us?
Yes, but it depends on where you hold your microphone. Sometimes you are more clear and sometimes not.
No, okay. How about now?
This is not clear. Maybe it's too close.
Okay, how about this?
Better.
Okay.
Maybe in between would be better.
Here?
Yes.
Okay. Comodo, very comfortable. Sorry about this. So maybe the question is, and I can repeat it if you haven't heard it before, maybe is for Sujeong, an approach, a practice, a new way of doing your job that has really shifted in the past few years?
Yeah, probably I should start with what I'm doing in my center at the moment. We are focusing on the interpretation and presentation of the World Heritage Sites. And the recent issue is about what we call difficult heritage, because you just mentioned about the difficult heritage that you discussed. You probably discussed about the object difficult heritage, not a kind of site of the difficult heritage, but it might share this common ground on that issue. We all know that we understand heritage as a process. Heritage is not a thing anymore, but some of the people do disagree with the concept at the moment from the critical heritage perspective. But anyway, the concept, understanding heritage as a process, was a kind of provoking idea to me to think about the conservation, to think about the ethical approach, to think about the experience and so on. So for me, understanding or defining heritage as a process is one of a kind of provoking moments to understand. And going back to the difficult heritage, in World Heritage System, we have been discussing a lot about whether the difficult heritage can be World Heritage Sites. It is really funny question, but heritage is just heritage. Whether it is difficult heritage or positive heritage, it doesn't matter. It is all about the past, and it is all about how we understand the past. But most of the member states within the World Heritage System, they would like to refuse the difficult heritage within their context, which is a kind of quite contradiction about the aim of the UN for keeping the peace in their mission. But anyway, difficult heritage connects to the visitors' experience, what we would like to tell them, what kind of narrative that we would like to tell them is very much important on their understanding, on their experience as well. I think for tangible aspects and also the object part, it is very much important what we would like to keep it and what we would like to show them and what we would like to share so that they can have a kind of, a wider or holistic experience on the heritage, both positive side and the negative side. And I'd like to say as an initial comment, as the starting point.
Thank you. Thank you, Sujeong.
Hi.
Stavroula?
Yeah, for me, it wasn't one moment. Until 2 years ago, I was working in academia. So I would say because I started focusing more on the scientific aspect of conservation, it was more discovering theories like the post-processual theory of archaeology of Ian Hodder, discovering Daniel Miller, and he's writing about stuff and why objects matter. That changed my mind. However, so this is the interesting thing when you work in academia is you meet a lot of brilliant people, and you develop your thinking very, very quickly, and then you go back to the field and then you see that there is a very different reality there. So I think the biggest struggle for me is how to translate all this thinking and all these readings into something that it's understood and it's applicable in practice. And I still have the same difficulty there. But yeah, I would say that for me the shift happened gradually, and also happened in multicultural, multidisciplinary environments where I had the opportunity to work with people that they were doing very different things from me. So we were talking about risk in relation to heritage, and I was talking about the ABC method that I was taught at the ICROM CCI RCE course, and they were talking in a very different, broader way. So even like connecting the two took time, but it was fascinating at the same time.
Thank you. I don't know if, Marina, you want to add your own, which might be a very different perspective.
Well, now, I would say, yeah, to me, it was somewhat the opposite than to Vula. So it's not about connecting theory to practice, but connecting practice to theory somewhat. In the fact that when I began working with installations and environments and with replicas and organizing exhibitions and having like big numbers of visitors, while at first hand, the idea was basically the one of having a forensic approach, a philological one, in which you respect the artwork in all the details, its materiality, its history, all the documents, and so on. Then you face reality. And reality is that if an exhibition is successful, you have big numbers of people who want to, enter into the artwork and touch it. And so you have to make decisions which are somewhat against history and the respect of the shape the artwork had, but would protect the accessibility. So you have to come to terms with what do you privilege? Do you privilege like the conservation of the artwork, its history and the respect of the shape, or accessibility? And I turned out to be, at the beginning, I was super conservative. So it was about conservation first and the original idea. And then I thought that probably we also have to create among, different necessities.
I think we're going back to what has been the center of this seminar, like reviewing the way that we do things and the way that we've learned about conservation, prioritizing the object, material, the history of the object, which is still paramount. But at the same time, and this is where I think it becomes perhaps more complicated, placing next to it the value of accessing or of caring for the experience of that object. We talked about what we do when we say don't touch, when we prevent the object from being in the space with people, that prevents perhaps the creation of new stories, of new relationships, and of new relationships in which we too, as professionals, can develop new understandings, new meanings. Something that I've heard you say, Sujeong, meaning making professionals, and that stayed with me. I think that that's what we do every day, although we may not always realize it. But also, I was thinking about what you said, Stavroula, about the fact that once you come from an environment where you focus on very specific topics or approaches, scientific one, for instance, and then you shift your practice, you are higher in a new position, and then you face with a different reality, a different environment in which there might be different practices. We talked about in these 2 days of the reality of working with not the resources that we are hoping to have, and or not the culture in which we could flourish according to our own views, right? And what those things do to our own practice. And so I was wondering, since we all experience limits, and maybe it's a good thing, and we all figure out ways to trying to do what we think is valuable, what we think is important for our collections, but also ourselves and the community. I wonder if you can share a thought, and this is open really to everyone. I thought about, when do we think that we succeed? It's a very conceptual question, but when are we finally happy with an outcome, with a practice that we implement, or a treatment, or anything that relates to conservation? When, knowing that we have had, struggles, difficulties, financial resources that maybe are not where we want them to be, when do we feel like we succeed? This is for Stavroula.
Okay, so that's a very interesting and complex question, especially because it's conceptual. But I was thinking a lot about recently what we mean about success, and when we feel successful. Are we successful, as Marina said, when we have big numbers in museums? Are we successful when the experience is the one that we envisioned? Or are we success when we touch audience that it's not our usual suspect, let's say, the usual audience we have? And I think all of them are valid. Sometimes even touching one person could be enough to make you feel successful, right? But so I have been thinking a lot about how museums and conservation has contributed to an exclusion of audiences, whether there is a physical disability, whether it is someone that is, for example, has vision issues and they cannot enjoy a painting because of the low light levels. Like, we contribute into excluding part of the audience. So for me, if I can think conceptually, I would say sharing decisions collectively and understanding what is the mission, what is it that we want, is the thing that, how can I say, having clear objectives as to what we want to achieve and working together with an open mind and with a more humane approach to things, then we can say that we are more successful than if we don't do it. I don't think there is one recipe for success, but definitely focusing on a more visitor experience and understanding that collections that are inherited in general are there for everyone, not for the sophisticated, the intellectuals, the ones that know everything about the art history. It's for everyone. And I was thinking about the reaction that we have had at the Acropolis, where they put like the concrete and everyone hates it, everyone thinks it's ugly, but at the same time this came with, after they installed also a lift, so people that couldn't go to see the Acropolis before can now go. And I was thinking that yes, it is ugly, yes, maybe there were like another 500 ways of doing it, however this improved access to an audience that couldn't go otherwise. And it's a compromise that for me, it's a successful compromise, even if I don't like it aesthetically, So and monuments and museums have survived for a long time, monuments more than museum collections. Museum collections are more recent. Therefore, I think we should give them some credit as to how resilient they can be to many things and many different people that they try to modify them over the years.
Thank you. Sujeong,
Yes.
your thoughts?
I would like to start with what I think what we do. Okay. One of our aim as a conservator or as an interpreter myself, or anyone who is in the heritage field, I think the current practice aims at connecting people to heritage. So I think that is really important issue, because previously we thought about the well-being of the heritage only. We didn't think about how people experience, how people feel about, and how people understand about the heritage. But now we know that our aim is connecting people to heritage. That is our aim. So in the context of that definition, I believe that we are all successful, because in some ways that we are contributing to our aim to connect people to heritage. And also, I told you previous meetings that interpretation is a meaning-making process through communication, participation, and experience. So when we think about communication, participation, and experience, that is all about for people and by people as well. We are just a facilitator to let them to understand better about the heritage, and also better experience, better communicate about the heritage, and share the ideas. In particular, about the in the experience, we would like to call different types of the experience. Number one is emotional experience. Number two is intellectual experience. And number three is the sensual experience. Marina mentioned about the accessibility, and also so as Stavroula mentioned about the accessibility. Sometimes we feel about that we should open to the public to experience in a sensual wise, but that is not the only experience. Emotional experience and intellectual experience is also the experience as well. So if we think about the balance, weighing which one is important between the material aspects and the the experience wise, we definitely can find some kind of the weighing the balance between those two, because it is not one way or the other around. It is a kind of both catching the aim of our practice. So I think in some ways that what we do, even though there has been a lot of shift of understanding the conservator and our practice, still we are very in a right track, that we are successful in connecting people to heritage by doing the scientific analysis, sharing what we found from our practice, and to share what is our dilemmas in decision making. All of those kind of things probably will be connecting to our aim to connect the people to heritage, and also contributing to the communication, participation, and experience at the end.
Up to me, in the present times, the debate we're having in general towards museums and culture, which is investing also the world of conservation, has a great effect also in changing the approach of conservation, in which traditionally conservation, apart from the theoretical part, which was mostly limited to art historians and philosophers like Cesare Brandi and his big tradition here in Italy, conservators have mostly been relegated to the material part, as if material and idea were two different departments, two different sides. And instead, this late debate, which invests in general the world of museums, the world of culture, rediscussing who the protagonists are, including more, being more open and accessible, in a way also is mining at the basis this traditional approach. Not that the material part is not important, of course it is crucial, but it also forces the job on dealing more with theory, with social and political change. So I think, getting back to the question, when are we successful? Up to me, we are successful when we are able to share, to open up the debate, to include, even before the conservation treatment, simply, the approach and the idea, and looking at things from multiple perspectives, not, the usual traditional one, which was what we were taught when we all studied conservation at my age, a long time ago, of course.
In that light of including more voices, I wonder if there is anyone here who wants to add their thoughts or being part of the conversation. I hope you all feel comfortable and free to do it. I'll pause a second. Yeah, maybe in a little bit. Yes, I was thinking as you were, I think one of the things that I wrote here in my notes is more voices for people and by people, and the emotional experience. I somehow I've been having a lot of thoughts in these days, because we heard experiences from collections that are diverse and including types of heritage from different cultures and different media. And I think there was something very humbling about hearing what those different heritage, different collections do to people, and what kind of issues or challenges they might present, given the objective institutions or given the needs of those objects. And so I think it's at the it's a complicated intersection between the desire of offering conservation strategies and environment and particular configurations of settings to preserve those collections, and at the same time having everything around us that is making it more under the risk of climate change. And maybe what I'm trying to get to is the field is changing. The collections are not are continuing to be very demanding in terms of what we can provide to preserve them, and at the same time, we cannot deny the fact that we're trying to do all these things in an environment that is becoming more and more that is changing and is posing institutions to reflect on what is sustainable, what are the conditions that we can provide, what are the resources, and how we can spend these resources to continue to sustain the collection, sustain our ambitions, provide access, and at the same time trying to not impact and affect our climate. I think what is humbling is to be here and finding a community of people which we know exist, which we know is out there working and trying to do their best. One of the few terms that I've been hearing in these 2 days have been about what is right, what is appropriate, what is, and I think it goes back to what we have learned, what we have been taught, and I feel these opportunities to talk and share are telling us that we can perhaps review that idea of success, that idea of us being the only one responsible for conservation and the preservation of these collections, and perhaps by including more voices and making strategies with other with the stakeholders, sharing that responsibility, sharing that which sometimes might be felt as a weight of responsibility, and maybe finding opportunities to perhaps develop our practice by, again, being inspired, being open to other solutions that perhaps within our field we cannot even develop ourselves. As Stavroula mentioned earlier, and perhaps you can expand a little bit on that, the opportunity to source and find inspiration from other disciplines. That is something that has definitely affected my practice in photography, reading papers from anthropology to philosophy and so on. So yes, if you want to expand on your experience with including different sources of knowledge. Thank you.
For me, what is interesting is inspiration can come from many different people. Sometimes there are simple people in the museum, visitors basically, or colleagues. I'm always interested to hear from people that say, oh, don't drag us to a museum. We don't like museums. And I'm trying to go to the bottom of it, like, why don't you like it? And then it's interesting that sometimes we go to a museum that has a very different interpretation, as Sujeong Lee said, and they get so much out of it. So first of all, I would like to say that we shouldn't blame ourselves from our ideas 20 years ago. We shouldn't blame our teachers. Each one of us does the best he, she, they can based on the circumstances. So we are all the result of our environment. The worst thing we can do is not to listen to other people. Sometimes we're just waiting for others to finish so we can make our point without actually listening to what they're saying. Over the years, I remember like heard so many times, we have so much to learn from the East. Yes, we do. How do we go about it? How do we go about it? So for example, the emotional experience, it's something that we all aim, and the intellectual. The sensual experience, which is something that there is archaeology of the senses. There are a lot of discussions in other fields. It hasn't reached so much conservation. For me, conservation, because, you know, we are problem solvers. It's great. It's great to have a curator to say, this is the experience I would like to create. How can you help me? And then as conservators to go and say, okay, how can I do this? How can I work around the restrictions I have, trying to do the best for the collection I have in hand, but at the same time, not compromise the idea or the message of this exhibition. It's an interesting problem, and it's a problem that I'm sure all conservators face. And in my experience, if you say it cannot be done, you are simply excluded from the decision-making process. So I've seen many times offices of conservators being moved to the lab. I've seen over and over, and this is a trend that is happening more and more, conservation labs and all the conservation and collections care team being moved in buildings outside the museum. Okay, so you cannot do anything basically for the collection. And basically be considered a difficult department of the museum. We occupy a lot of space, we are expensive. Don't forget that square footage is, in museums, valuable for exhibitions, for restaurants, for cafes. So, of course, we know all this. So I would like to say, if we switch a little bit our approach, if we accept that what we were taught even 10 years ago are not anymore relevant, you talk about sustainability, you talk about the environmental crisis that we go after, we live at the moment, we can't apply the same rules that were applicable in the past. We are at another point in history. So we shouldn't be hard on ourselves or our teachers, but at the same time, we should be brave enough to explore new ways of doing things, even if they're not the best practice that we were used in the past.
Does anyone want to add anything?
I'm sorry, I'm always intervening, and please, be free to intervene. And but I just wanted to thank you, Roberta, because in these 2 days we had colleagues, and all the colleagues who are here, we have colleagues from different fields. So we were talking about these topics under very diverse perspectives, from dealing with problematic fascist art collections to Asian art to coins and medals. I don't know if in English the word numismatic exists. I don't know. So and that was that was really, really precious, because when it comes to different perspectives and opening up the discourse. For instance, Voula, you mentioned the sensual experience, and when we were talking about coins and medals, we broached the topic of touching, the sense of touch, and the fact that these artifacts were going from hand to hand, but how can you make them available, and why the iconographic perspective has been privileged historically to the sense of touching, for instance. So there's a big / small revolution which has to be at least thought in the way we approach collections. And I want to say personally that I'm grateful of working in an ethnographic museum such as Mudec, and I want to thank all our curators who are here, because thankfully to these very, very different and diverse collections in terms of media, of cultures, of meaning, you really have to force yourself to rethink the paradigm of conservation, exhibition, and interpretation.
Sujeong, unless you want to add something.
Yeah, you talk about the other discourse. Recent years, I'm learning a lot from the environmental psychologist, because to understand when the people comes into the heritage site, actually what people see, what people read, and what people understand, and what they expect from displaying, interpretation and signboard and so on, which is very much helpful for us. That we didn't think before. We learn a lot from the archaeologists. We learn a lot from the curators and also scientists and so on. But recent years in heritage area that psychologists is also, very, recent area that we are collaborating and we learn a lot. So I think in some ways that, it is very important for us. What we would like to present is very much affecting to the visitor's experience, and it may be different what we thought before. So the public can feel in a different way. Actually, we didn't believe so, but so that is one area that I would like to add on. Psychological areas is also the area that we probably can learn for our practice.
Yes, we mentioned it yesterday, psychological, intellectual, emotional, sensual impact that heritage can provide, or effects, or positive effects, sometimes not so positive, but anyhow, again, it's about making meanings and experiences and allow these objects to perform, to be what they are, and to people to experience them. One of the things that sometimes I think can pose the conservator in a position where we do want to foster, we do want to facilitate these opportunities, but sometimes it's what can be challenging is to have these conversations, or trying to shift the culture in the places where we work, regarding, until yesterday we were about, no, we may want to reconsider touching this object, we may want to reconsider displaying this object in this certain way, and today, because we are perhaps more open to provide access, it's sort of like silly, but we are now facing the resistance that we created. Same with light levels, and perhaps many other, we could make other examples. But so if, I don't know, maybe we can spend a minute talking about the types of skills and dispositions that we can develop, or we have to develop, in order to now I don't know, propose certain ideas, or without contradicting ourselves. If you 3 or 4 or 5, all of you have experiences that you want to share about how you dealt with this challenge of I have my own, but I will prefer to allow somebody else to share.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I mean, I was trying to give the mic to somebody else, but there was no. Why don't you repeat the question 1 second?
It's about what kind of skills, what kind of approaches. We talk about the approaches in conservation, in the way that we do things, but amongst the things that we're trying to do differently is also having these conversations with our colleagues, curators, directors, with whom we set until yesterday, oh, there are all these restrictions for these objects because they are too fragile, or we denied loans, or we didn't really support certain practices because until yesterday we were scared, or we center all our attention on the object itself, and now we are more open to say, okay, I think we can manage it. I think we can develop solutions to allow this object to go out on loan, or have this different type of display. But how can we have that conversation without contradicting ourselves with what we have said until yesterday?
Okay, so I think we have a good example. Vula knows this. We have talked about it. It's a collection which was offered to us in donation, a collection of African art, but potentially problematic, as often happens with this kind of collections out of their own country. And we decided to study it. We decided to think about it in a choral way, involving anthropologists, but also communities of interest, of course, the museum curators, the collector, the family, let's say, of the collector, and it's a process on the way. It's going to be a long process, and by doing this, we will decide together what we will do, and most probably the collection will be somewhat considered under different logics. Part of it, some of it will enter the museum collections permanently. Some of it will go back to some African museums. So some of it will be used for the communities for specific practice, or even, you know, for new installations of contemporary art. It's an ongoing process that we are doing with Paul Basu, who is the president of our museum board, and we're also thinking of an exhibition as a way of spreading the news of the process we are doing for this collection. So this is something which and it also has to do, of course, with conservation, because some of the artworks need, you know, conservation treatments, but this kind of forced us to think differently. And of course, it's costly. It's a process which is very costly for the museum. Not very, maybe not, but it is costly, and we are not sure, you know, of the outcome. But this uncertainty is key. The fact that we don't have clear answers, nevertheless, we want to do this. We want to go through the process, and we want to do it collectively with different professions, and not only having the voice of the museum heard, but also all the possible voices which can contribute to this problem.
Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned including other professionals, and I was thinking about what is happening at a training level in conservation programs, and how much attention has been given, especially in the US. I'm less familiar with the situation in Europe and in Italy, specifically about facilitating participation and inclusion of certain groups that have been excluded because of the process itself. Reflecting on that, we showed yesterday slides from Sanchita Balachandran paper from 2016, and I've been thinking about what that will look like, about the demographic of conservation and in general, our professionals in this country, and I was wondering what that demographic will look like here. We'll see, maybe there will be some data in the future, but thinking about how open we can be and should be with regard to the different approaches that we see are emerging through publications and these opportunities and conferences. I wonder how much the field will change in the coming years when new generations of conservators will be out there practicing conservation perhaps differently, with different culture, with different understanding of the profession. So part of me is thinking it's really time to be open, stay open, and be prepared to really welcome what is coming. I think a lot have changed for me in terms of my understanding of photography conservation, of clearly in these 2 days, I feel like I've done caught up with some of the practices in different collections with different materials, and I wonder what your expectations or thoughts are with regard to what might come in the coming years with regard to conservation, really through the contributions and new understandings of the profession and heritage itself from future conservators. Again, sorry to not, say who should, but I hope you volunteer too. But you, Stavroula, please.
Okay, I would actually like Sujeong to go first on this, and then I can follow.
Yeah, I can do. Sorry, I'm not conservator as a practice. I do not actually deal with the material aspect of the object. I used to work in the Royal Palace Museum in the collection department, so that as an art historian, I was doing some of the research to touch the material, but not as a conservator. But I'd like to give you one good example is that what happens in the exhibition and the role of the conservator in that museum where I was working. We were displaying the beautiful princess robe in 16th century, which was, handmade with a lot of embroidery and so on. And during the conservation process, underneath of that robe, we found a kind of, Asian paper inside of it, because, robe should be really stiff and very plain, so that they put the Asian paper inside of the robe, so that the robe is not going to be, in different shades. And that paper, the conservator found with the X-ray scientific analysis, that paper is not a kind of plain paper. It was a kind of exam paper, which failed to be a good score at the end. So they reused in the 16th century for the princess robe the exam paper, which was written by the failed aristocrat, I think. And the conservator got the idea that whether they would like to remove that paper or not in the process of conservation. And that gave a big dilemma to them. And they didn't make a decision themselves. They opened those kind of questions to the public in the exhibition process. So what I'm thinking is that we sometimes are really stressful about to be a decision maker, whether we have to keep this or not, and so on. But we don't necessarily to be. One of our skills that we have to develop to ask the right question to the people, to the right person to answer that question and to give some advice. And I think creativity is also a needed skill, I believe. So I would like to, propose that, much beyond skills that we probably will need in near future as a kind of, material conservator, but also as a kind of, open our position to the public decisions and also the other discipline decision makers as well. Voila.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer in two different ways. The first way is how I was thinking as an academic training conservators, and I always wanted to train people that will be able to adapt to any change that will come in the future. So a lot of the emphasis was on the approach and the methodology rather than understanding perfectly everything, okay? Because we didn't have the time. And I always had this conflict with conservators in the field, or because they cannot do the perfect infill, or because they cannot do the perfect color integration. And I was thinking, yes, but these are skills that once you start working, you get them, but the approach is a different thing. And this is where, of course, you realize that change is very difficult. And it was always a problem that I had, because I was training these bright, young things, brains, that they would go into the job market. And by the time they were established by the time they had a job, first of all, because they had to do, as you all know, small contracts here and there, and it would take years most of the times until they had a permanent position, right? And then within that museum, let's say, it would take some time to get established in order to raise their voice. And by the time this would happen, they were fully absorbed by a system that was more old-fashioned. Not all museums, but let's say they had a different approach. So I always felt like, have I succeeded or have I failed, actually? Shouldn't I put my efforts into giving them more technical skills that the job market wants? Do I produce, let's say, thinkers or technicians? Okay. And I always resisted the idea of technicians, because I thought a conservator is someone with a lot of technical knowledge, but the key is in the problem solving, in the critical approach, and so on. So this was all of my background that I carry in my current job. But so I was trying to see the trends in other fields, okay? But now, the more I think about it, the more I realize that you cannot predict the future, right? You cannot predict. You can predict, because trends are there, some of the things that will happen, but others we don't know. Like AI, for example, we don't know what will happen in 5 years, because it's so fast developing. We don't know. Okay. So, and I was thinking whether it is better not being able to predict everything or not. And I think it's not a bad thing, as long as you're open-minded and you have the critical thinking to be able to be proactive when it is needed and be reactive when it's something you didn't expect. So I think the field change is difficult for all of us, but the skills that will be needed will change as well, have been changing consistently. But I was thinking that it was important to get established as a field first, because it's a new profession, whether we like it or not. And then, accept that the skills will change, and then we should be able to adapt.
To that, thank you both, really. To that, I feel like to continue to stay established. I don't know if we're fully established everywhere as a profession, but let's say we are established or recognized. Again, I'm hesitant to say it, but let's say the only way that we can establish ourselves or stay relevant, I think, is exactly what you said, Stavroula, to stay open, to stay available to really what is coming without necessarily have a preconceived idea of how things should be done, what is correct, what is unjust. I think we know what is unjust. And I think to keep that in mind, perhaps just trying to manage that change. I think one of the things that to me is really resonating lately is that conservation is not truly about just preservation of objects, but is managing that change that is inevitable. Is inevitable for collections and heritage, is inevitable for us too as humans. And I think, I know we have 1 minute. I want to spend it to say thank you to you too, to everyone here, to Mudec, to MUST. It's been really like an amazing opportunity to be involved in this activity, in this seminar. I don't know if you all want to say something really quick. No? Great. Thank you so much for your time. It's really been interesting to hear your thoughts, and thank you everyone who's been listening from YouTube. Thank you, Comune di Milano. I hope the conversation will continue as we continue to work on our own practices. Thank you so much.
Can I say one last thing? Thank you very much for inviting me, and please come to Korea and let me know. Yeah, I will take you the other word of the conservation and the culture as well.
Thank you.
as well.
We're coming. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you so much. Bye bye.